Emily Carter's tears froze on her cheeks as she sat on the Wyoming station steps, clutching a crumpled telegram that destroyed everything her teaching position had been given away before she even arrived. 3,000 miles from home, with $7 to her name and nowhere to go in the bitter October night. She was about to give up when a deep voice cut through her despair. "Miss, you look like you could use some help." She looked up to find a cowboy standing in the lamplight, his weathered face kind but unreadable. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Stay with me as I share this incredible story of finding home in the most unexpected place. And don't forget to comment below which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The wind cut through Emily Carter's traveling coat like a blade, finding every worn seam, every threadbare patch she'd carefully mended before leaving Philadelphia. She pulled the thin wool tighter around her shoulders, but it was useless against the Wyoming cold, a cold that seemed to seep into her very bones, making them ache with something deeper than just the October chill. The telegram crumpled in her fist had long since become damp with tears she couldn't seem to stop the ink running slightly, though the words remained cruelly clear. Position filled. Regret any inconvenience. 7 words. That's all it took to destroy months of planning, of hope, of carefully saved pennies and sold possessions. 7 words to turn her brave adventure into a nightmare. The Cottonwood station stood behind her, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness, mocking her with their promise of shelter she couldn't afford. The last train heading east wouldn't come for 3 days, and even if it came tomorrow, she didn't have enough money for a ticket back. $7.32. That's what remained of her life savings after the journey west. It might buy her a few nights in a boarding house if she was lucky, a few meals if she was careful, but then what? "You should have listened to Mother," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking on the words. Her mother's warnings echoed in her memory. Emily rose. This is foolishness. A young woman alone traveling to the territories. What are you thinking? Stay here where you belong, where it's safe, where we know people. But staying meant watching her sister's children grow while her own dreams withered. Staying meant teaching at Mrs. Whitman's Academy for Young Ladies, where creativity was stifled and conformity prized above all else. Staying meant marrying Harold Dennison, who saw her as nothing more than a pretty addition to his household, someone to manage his home and bear his children while he pursued his banking career. The teaching position in Cottonwood had seemed like a gift from heaven, a chance to start fresh, to build something of her own, to matter in a way she never could back east. The school board's letter had been so encouraging, so certain. They needed someone with her qualifications desperately, they'd said. The children of Cottonwood were eager to learn, hungry for the education she could provide. Lies. All lies. Or perhaps not lies, perhaps just the careless oversight of people who didn't realize they were playing with someone's entire future. The position had been filled 2 weeks ago by the mayor's niece, a girl fresh from normal school, who decided at the last minute to come west. No one had thought to send word to Emily already en route, already past the point of no return. "Excuse me, miss." The deep voice startled her so badly she nearly tumbled off the wooden step where she'd been sitting. A man stood a few feet away, his tall frame casting a shadow in the lamplight from the station. She couldn't make out his features clearly, but she could see the outline of a wide-brimmed hat, the shape of broad shoulders, the glint of spurs on well-worn boots. "I'm fine," she said, automatically swiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Just waiting for someone." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Who would she be waiting for? She knew no one in Wyoming territory, no one west of the Mississippi, really. But admitting that to a stranger, especially a male stranger, seemed dangerous, foolish. The man shifted slightly, and the light caught his face. He was younger than his voice suggested, perhaps 30 or so, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw roughened by a day or two's worth of stubble. His eyes, though his eyes were what held her attention. They were the color of winter sky, gray-blue, and surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he'd spent his life outdoors. "No offense meant, miss, but you don't look fine." He gestured toward the station. "And the station master locked up 20 minutes ago. Whoever you're waiting for isn't coming tonight." Fresh tears threatened, and Emily bit her lip hard to keep them back. She would not cry in front of this stranger. She would not. That's none of your concern, sir." She tried to put steel in her voice, the same tone she'd used with unruly students back in Philadelphia, but it came out wavering weak. The man studied her for a long moment, then slowly removed his hat. His hair was indeed too long, curling slightly over his collar, and in the lamplight she could see lines around his eyes, laugh lines her grandmother would have called them, though this man's face seemed built for seriousness. "Name's Luke Harrison," he said simply. "I run the livery stable here in Cottonwood, and while you're right that your business isn't my concern, I can't walk away and leave a lady sitting in the cold at this hour. It wouldn't be right. I told you I'm waiting for someone. Yes, you said." He replaced his hat and crossed his arms. "Here's the thing, miss. Temperature's dropping fast tonight. First real cold snap of the season. You stay out here much longer dressed like that and Doc Murphy will be treating you for pneumonia come morning. That is assuming someone finds you before then." The brutal honesty of his words hit her like a slap. She wanted to argue to maintain some shred of dignity, but what was the point? He was right. She was alone, nearly penniless, and completely unprepared for a Wyoming winter night. I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted the words barely above a whisper. "The teaching position I came for. It's been filled. I don't know anyone here. I have a little money, but not enough for—" She couldn't finish. Not enough for anything that mattered. Not enough to go home. Not enough to start over. Not enough. Luke Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then he took a step closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. "What's your name, Miss—" Emily. Emily Carter." "Well, Miss Carter, my sister runs a boarding house about 3 blocks from here. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and warm, and Sarah's a good cook. I'm heading that way now. I could walk you over, introduce you. She might be willing to work something out for the payment, maybe let you help with chores in exchange for a few nights' stay while you figure things out." Pride warred with desperation in Emily's chest. She'd never taken charity in her life, had worked for everything she'd ever had. But this wasn't Philadelphia where she knew the rules, knew how to navigate. This was Wyoming, wild and cold and unforgiving. I couldn't impose, no imposition. Sarah's always complaining she needs more help, especially with the washing. And he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Look, Miss Carter, I don't know your story, don't need to know it. But I've seen that look before, the one you're wearing. Saw it on plenty of faces after the war, people who'd lost everything and didn't know how to start over. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." The war. She noticed now what she'd missed before, a slight favoring of his left leg when he shifted his weight, the kind of subtle compensation that came from an old injury. He'd served then. Seen things, survived things. "You were in the war?" she asked, partly to delay the decision, partly from genuine curiosity. 3 years with the Colorado First. Came home to find the ranch sold for taxes and my folks gone to fever." His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the old pain beneath it. "Started over with nothing but a discharge paper and a lame horse. That was 6 years ago. Now I've got the livery, a little house on the edge of town, and a life that's mine. Point is, Miss Carter, everybody needs help sometimes. No shame in it." A gust of wind sent dead leaves skittering across the platform, and Emily shivered violently. Her fingers had gone numb despite being clenched into fists, and she could no longer feel her toes in her thin boots. "All right," she said, standing on unsteady legs. "If your sister truly wouldn't mind. She'll probably talk your ear off, truth be told. Sarah doesn't get much female company, at least not the educated kind." He offered his arm, a gesture so naturally gallant it made her chest tight with homesickness for the mannered world she'd left behind. "Come on, let's get you warm." Emily hesitated only a moment before placing her hand on his arm. The wool of his coat was rough beneath her fingers, but warm, solid. Real in a way nothing had felt since she'd received that terrible telegram. They walked in silence for a few minutes, Emily struggling to keep up with his long stride, despite his obvious effort to go slowly. The streets of Cottonwood were mostly dark, with only occasional rectangles of light spilling from windows. Somewhere a dog barked, and farther off she could hear piano music and laughter. A saloon, probably, though Luke steered them away from that part of town. "How long were you traveling?" he asked suddenly. 8 days. Train to Cheyenne, then the stage here. 8 days of hope and anticipation, she thought bitterly. 8 days of imagining her new classroom, her new students, her new life. From back east, Philadelphia, he whistled low. That's a fair piece, family there. My mother, a sister, who would both say they'd told her so, who would welcome her back with a mixture of relief and disappointment. Her mother would resume her campaign for Harold Dennison. Her sister would offer sympathy while secretly glad that Emily's adventure had failed, proving that the safe conventional path was the only sensible one. They know where you are. I sent a letter from Cheyenne telling them I'd arrived safely. Another bitter irony. By the time they received word of her failure, she'd probably already be on her way home if she could find a way to afford the passage. Luke stopped in front of a 2-story frame house painted white, though the paint was peeling in places. A sign hung by the door, Harrison's Boarding House Clean Rooms, Good Food, Fair Prices. Light glowed warmly from the windows, and Emily could smell something delicious, bread perhaps, or pie. Sarah's probably still up, Luke said, reaching for the door. Fair warning, she's going to mother you. It's her way. Before Emily could respond, the door opened from within, and a woman appeared, tall like her brother with the same dark hair, though hers was neatly pinned up, and the same gray-blue eyes, though hers were bright with curiosity and warmth. Luke, I was starting to worry. She stopped, taking in Emily with one comprehensive glance that seemed to catalog everything from her tear-stained cheeks to her shabby coat to the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Oh, my dear, come in immediately. You look frozen half to death. And just like that, Emily found herself swept into warmth and light and the kind of purposeful kindness that brooked no argument. Sarah Harrison took her coat, tisking over how thin it was, guided her to a chair by the massive iron stove in the kitchen, and had a cup of hot coffee in her hands before Emily could form a proper thank you. Luke fetched the heavy quilt from the cedar chest, Sarah ordered, already moving to the stove where a pot of something savory simmered. And then tell me where you found this poor child. Station steps, Luke said simply, but his eyes met his sister's with some kind of silent communication that passed between siblings who knew each other well. The teaching position, Sarah said, not a question but a statement. I heard Mayor Collins brought his niece in for it. Shameful not letting you know. Emily looked up, startled. How did you... Small town, dear. Everyone knows everything usually before it happens. Sarah ladled soup into a bowl thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, the most appetizing thing Emily had seen in days. Eat first, then we'll sort out the rest. I can pay... Emily started, but Sarah waved her off. Eat, she said firmly. Luke, sit down. You haven't had supper either, I'd wager. Luke hung his hat on a peg by the door and did as ordered, taking a chair across from Emily. In the better light of the kitchen, she could see him more clearly. His face was weathered, but not harsh, with strong features that might have been handsome in a conventional sense, if not for a nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and a thin scar that ran through his left eyebrow. His hands, when he reached for the coffee Sarah poured him, were scarred and calloused working hands that had seen hard use. Thank you. Emily managed the soup, warming her from within. Both of you, I don't know what I would have done. You would have figured something out, Luke said quietly. That kind of determination that brings a woman alone all the way from Philadelphia doesn't just give up at the first setback. Doesn't it? Emily laughed bitterly. I was sitting on those steps crying like a child. Some determination. You were crying, he agreed. But you were still sitting upright, still thinking. I've seen people give up, Miss Carter. Really give up. That wasn't what you were doing. Sarah looked between them with interest. How long have you been teaching, dear? 5 years. First at a subscription school in Philadelphia, then at Mrs. Whitman's Academy for Young Ladies. Whitman's? Sarah's eyebrows rose. That's quite prestigious, isn't it? Why would you leave that for Cottonwood? Emily set down her spoon, choosing her words carefully. I wanted something different, a chance to really make a difference, not just teach young ladies how to speak French and paint watercolors. I thought out here education would matter more, mean more. It does, Luke said suddenly. Just because the position here was filled doesn't mean there isn't need. Half the settlements in the territory are crying out for teachers. But I don't know anyone don't have connections. You do now, Sarah said firmly. You know us. And tomorrow, after you've had a proper night's rest and a good breakfast, We'll put our heads together and figure out your next step. Luke knows everyone within 50 miles hazard of running the only livery stable. Someone somewhere needs a teacher. I can't impose on you like that. Child, Sarah interrupted. Do you see any other boarders here? This place has been half empty since the railroad rumors turned out false. I could use the company and the help if you're willing. Room and board in exchange for helping with cleaning and cooking plus a small wage. That would give you time to find a proper position. Emily's throat tightened. Why would you help a complete stranger? The siblings exchanged another look. We've been strangers in need ourselves, Sarah said softly. After our parents died after Luke came home from the war, we had nothing but each other and the kindness of people who didn't have to help but did anyway. Pastor Mills, who let us sleep in the church that first winter. Mrs. Chen at the general store, who extended credit she knew we might never repay. Tom Brennan, who sold Luke the livery business for half what it was worth and gave him a year to pay it off. That's how it works out here, dear. We help each other or we don't survive. Besides, Luke added with the ghost of a smile, Sarah's been complaining for months that she needs intelligent conversation. You'd be doing us a favor, really. Luke Harrison, I do not complain, Sarah protested, but she was smiling too. Emily looked between them, these siblings who had carved out a life from nothing, who offered help without judgment or pity. The soup was warming her stomach, the quilt Luke had brought warming her shoulders, but it was their matter-of-fact kindness that began to thaw something frozen inside her chest. All right, she said quietly. If you're certain. We're certain, Sarah said briskly. Now finish your soup and I'll show you to your room. Nothing fancy, but the bed's comfortable and the room's warm. Tomorrow we'll wash that traveling dress and see what we can do about finding you something warmer to wear. Can't have you catching pneumonia before we find you a school full of children to teach. As Sarah bustled about chattering about meal times and house rules and which merchants in town were trustworthy, Emily caught Luke watching her with those serious gray-blue eyes. When their gazes met, he nodded slightly, a small gesture of encouragement that somehow steadied her more than all the practical help. Maybe she hadn't failed. Maybe this was simply a detour on a journey she couldn't yet see the end of. Later, alone in the small but clean room Sarah had shown her to Emily, sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to fully feel the events of the day. This morning, she'd awakened on the stage full of hope. Tonight, she was dependent on the kindness of strangers, her future uncertain. But she was warm, she was safe. And downstairs, she could hear Sarah and Luke talking quietly. Their voices, a comfortable murmur that reminded her of home, not the home she'd left, but something else. Something that might become home, if she let it. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Carter! It was Luke's voice. Sorry to disturb you. Sarah wanted me to bring up an extra blanket. Nights get cold here. She opened the door to find him holding a thick wool blanket, obviously hand-woven. He offered it somewhat awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable being at a lady's bedroom door, even on an errand of mercy. Thank you, she said, taking the blanket. Mr. Harrison Luke, I wanted to say what you did tonight, finding me, bringing me here. I won't forget it. He shifted his weight, that subtle favoring of his left leg again. Anyone would have done the same. No, Emily said firmly. They wouldn't have. I've lived in Philadelphia all my life, and I can tell you that most people would have walked right past. What you and your sister are doing, it's extraordinary. He looked uncomfortable with the praise. It's necessary, he corrected. Out here we take care of each other, or we perish. Simple as that. But Miss Carter, he paused, seeming to choose his words, don't give up on teaching. The children out here, they need someone like you. Someone who came all this way because she believed in something more than just collecting a wage. How do you know what I believe in? Same way I know you won't give up, even though right now you think you might. It's in your eyes. My ma used to say you could tell everything about a person by their eyes. You're a safe fighter even when you're crying. Before Emily could respond, he touched the brim of his hat and turned away. Good night, Miss Carter. Things will look better in the morning. They always do. She stood in the doorway watching him navigate the narrow hallway with that slight, careful limp. A man who'd lost everything and built it back. A man who stopped to help strangers on cold nights. A man who saw her as a fighter even when she felt defeated. "Good night, Mr. Harrison," she called softly. "And thank you. Again." He paused at the top of the stairs, glanced back. "Luke," he said. "Just Luke is fine." Then he was gone, and Emily closed her door, pressed her back against it, and for the first time since receiving that terrible telegram, felt something that might have been hope. The room was simple. A bed with an iron frame, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, a small wardrobe, one chair, and a narrow window that looked out onto the main street. But it was clean as promised and warm from the heat rising from the kitchen below. Sarah had left a nightgown on the bed, worn but soft smelling of lavender and soap. Emily changed slowly, her fingers fumbling with buttons, exhaustion finally catching up with her. 8 days of travel. The emotional blow of the lost position. The fear and cold of the evening, it all seemed to hit at once, leaving her barely able to stand. But as she slipped between sheets that smelled of sunshine and fresh air, she thought about Luke's words. "The children out here need someone like you." Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't an ending, but a beginning she simply hadn't expected. Outside, she could hear the town settling for the night horses in the livery stable. Luke ran a dog barking somewhere, the distant piano from the saloon finally falling silent. Different sounds than Philadelphia's nighttime symphony of carriages and gaslight, and too many people pressed too close together. Here there was space, silence, room to breathe. Room to become someone new, perhaps. Someone braver than the woman who'd left Philadelphia, someone stronger than the woman who'd wept on the station steps. Through the thin walls, she could hear Sarah moving about in her own room, humming something low and tuneless. Comforting maternal sounds that made Emily's chest ache for her own mother, despite their differences. She wondered what her mother was doing right now. Probably needlework by the parlor fire, worrying about her wayward daughter, wondering why Emily couldn't be satisfied with the life that satisfied everyone else. But satisfaction and happiness weren't the same thing, were they? Emily had been satisfied in Philadelphia. She'd had work respectability, comfort. But happy. When was the last time she'd been truly happy? Maybe watching little Susan Parker finally understand long division, her face lighting up with comprehension. Or the time she'd convinced the Academy's board to let her teach Shakespeare to the older girls. Really teach it, not just have them memorize pretty speeches. Those moments had been rare, though bright spots in a gray routine of proper behavior and limited expectations. Out here, even with all its uncertainty and hardship, she'd felt more alive in one day than in the past year in Philadelphia. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, a wild, lonely sound that should have frightened her but didn't. It was just another voice in this new world, no more threatening than the city sounds she'd grown up with. Perhaps less so, at least here, the dangers were honest ones. Cold in distance and weather, not the slow suffocation of a life lived within boundaries drawn by others. Emily pulled the quilts up to her chin, Sarah's quilt, Luke's blanket, layers of warmth provided by strangers who asked nothing in return except that she not give up. Tomorrow she would earn her keep, would help Sarah with whatever was needed. She would write to her mother, though what she would say she didn't yet know. She would begin again because that's what Luke had done, what Sarah had done, what people did out here, where failure meant death. And so you simply didn't fail. You adapted. You survived. You helped others do the same. And maybe if she was very lucky, you found a new kind of home, one you chose, rather than inherited, one you built, rather than simply occupied. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Luke's wagon pulling into the livery stable. The creak of wooden doors, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to the horses. He'd gone back out into the cold after bringing her the blanket back to work that probably never ended. A man who knew about starting over, about building something from nothing. Tomorrow, she thought drowsily. Tomorrow, I begin again. And for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, that thought brought anticipation rather than fear. The morning sun streaming through the narrow window woke Emily before Sarah's gentle knock. For a moment she forgot where she was expecting to see the familiar wallpaper of her Philadelphia room. Then it all came rushing back, the journey. The telegram, the cold station steps, Luke Harrison's quiet kindness. "Miss Carter, breakfast is ready when you are." Emily dressed quickly in her traveling dress, now wrinkled beyond redemption, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was already warm, filled with the scent of fresh biscuits and coffee. Luke sat at the table looking like he'd been up for hours while Sarah bustled about with practiced efficiency. "Good morning," Emily said suddenly, shy in the daylight. Last night's desperation had made accepting help easier. This morning, pride reasserted itself. "Morning," Luke replied, standing politely. "Sleep well." "Yes, thank you. The room was very comfortable." Sarah set a plate before her eggs, bacon biscuits with butter and jam. "Eat up. We've got a full day ahead." Luke's had an idea. Emily glanced at him questioningly as she took her seat. He pushed a piece of paper across the table, a roughly drawn map with various marks and notations. "Elk Creek," he said, pointing to one of the marks. "About 15 miles north. Settlement's been growing steady for 2 years. They've been advertising for a teacher for 6 months, but nobody's taken the position." "Why not?" Emily asked, spreading jam on a biscuit. "Remote," Luke said honestly. "It's a full day's ride from here, rough country. The settlement's mostly farming families, some cattle, maybe 30 children of school age according to Tom Brennan, who delivers supplies out there. They built a schoolhouse last year, nothing fancy but solid. There's a small room attached for the teacher to live in." Emily studied the map, trying to imagine it. 15 miles might as well be 1,500 from everything she'd known. How would I even get there? "I need to deliver a repaired wagon to the Olmsteads tomorrow. They live halfway to Elk Creek. I could take you along, introduce you to some folks, if you're interested." Sarah poured coffee, her movements careful. "It's not an easy life, dear. These settlements, they're not like Cottonwood, certainly not like Philadelphia, but the people are good. They'd appreciate someone with your education, your experience." "What if they've already filled the position too?" "They haven't," Luke said with certainty. "Would have heard. News travels fast out here and nobody's been fool enough." He stopped, color rising slightly in his weathered cheeks. "That is, nobody's been willing to take on such an isolated position." Emily almost smiled at his discomfort. "You were going to say fool enough. It's all right. Maybe I am foolish. I've certainly been told so often enough lately." "Brave isn't the same as foolish," Luke said quietly. "Takes courage to want something different than what's expected." Their eyes met across the table, and Emily felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared understanding. This man knew about defying expectations, about choosing the harder path. "When would we leave?" she asked. "First light. It's a long ride and we'd want to arrive before dark. You'd stay overnight with the Olmstead's good people, they'd welcome you, and then decide if you want to go on to Elk Creek." Sarah cleared her throat. "Which means today we need to get you properly outfitted. That dress won't do for riding, and you'll need warmer clothes if you're going to survive a winter in Elk Creek." "I can't afford—" "Hush," Sarah interrupted. "Consider it an investment. You'll pay me back when you're settled and teaching. Mrs. Chen has some ready-made things that might fit you, and I've got fabric if we need to make alterations." The day passed in a whirl of activity. Sarah proved to be a force of nature when she set her mind to something, and by afternoon Emily found herself possessed of 2 sturdy wool skirts, 3 shirtwaists, a proper winter coat that had belonged to a settler's wife who'd gone back east, thick stockings and boots that actually fit. "I'll be in debt to you forever," Emily protested as Sarah added yet another item to the pile. "Nonsense. These things were just gathering dust in Mrs. Chen's store. She's happy to see them put to use." Sarah held up a divided riding skirt, examining it critically. "This should do for tomorrow. Can't have you trying to ride side saddle for 15 miles. "I don't really ride," Emily admitted. "In Philadelphia, we took carriages." Sarah and Luke exchanged glances. "You'll learn," Luke said. "I'll put you on Buttercup. She's gentle as a lamb." That evening, as Emily helped Sarah prepare dinner, learning the wood stove's temperament, how to gauge heat without a thermometer. Luke worked in the stable, readying the wagon for tomorrow's journey. Through the kitchen window, Emily could see him moving about, checking harnesses, loading supplies. There was something comforting about his steady presence, his quiet competence. "He's a good man," Sarah said, following Emily's gaze. "The war changed him, made him quieter than he used to be, but it didn't break him. Not like it broke some." "He mentioned losing the ranch," Sarah's face darkened. Carpetbaggers. Bought the tax debt for pennies while Luke was fighting to preserve the Union. By the time he got home, it was all gone. Our parents' graves are on land that belongs to strangers now. How did you both survive it? Each other, Sarah said simply. And the kindness of people like Pastor Mills. Luke worked every job he could find. Mucking stalls, breaking horses, hauling freight. Saved every penny until he could buy the livery. I took in washing, mending, whatever I could. We lived in one room above the stable that first year. She smiled at the memory. We've come far since then. After dinner, Luke appeared in the doorway. Miss Carter might want to come try sitting on Buttercup for a few minutes. Get acquainted before tomorrow. Emily followed him to the stable, where a placid mare stood waiting. The horse was aptly named cream-colored with a gentle expression. She's beautiful, Emily said, stroking the soft nose. She's patient, Luke corrected, which is what you need. Come on, I'll help you up. It was awkward managing the divided skirt and finding her balance, but Luke's hands were steady at her waist, lifting her easily into the saddle. Emily grabbed the saddle horn, feeling precarious despite the horse's stillness. Relax, Luke said, adjusting the stirrups. You're fighting her before she's even moved. Buttercup knows her job. Trust her. He led the mare around the stable yard, slowly, Emily gradually finding her balance. His hand stayed on the bridle close enough to grab her if she started to fall, but his presence was reassuring rather than hovering. Better, he said after a few circuits. You'll be sore tomorrow, but you'll manage. As he helped her down, his hands lingered for just a moment at her waist, and Emily felt her breath catch. In the lamplight of the stable, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. Thank you, she managed, for everything. The rescue last night, this opportunity, the riding lesson. No rescue, he said, stepping back. Just neighbors helping neighbors, that's how it works here. But Emily saw something in his expression that suggested it might be more than simple neighborly duty, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the fear of falling off a horse. That night she lay in bed thinking about the journey tomorrow, about Elk Creek and its 30 children waiting for a teacher. It seemed impossible that just 2 nights ago she'd been on the stage full of plans for a different position, a different life. Now she was about to venture even further into the unknown, guided by people she'd just met, but already trusted more than seemed wise. Through the wall, she could hear Luke moving about in the room Sarah had given him for the night he lived in a small house behind the livery, but had stayed to be ready for the early departure. The sound was oddly intimate, knowing he was so close, this man who'd appeared out of the darkness when she needed help most. Morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Emily, dressed in the divided skirt and warm layers Sarah had procured, her fingers trembling slightly with nerves. Downstairs, Luke was already loading the wagon while Sarah packed food for the journey. You don't have to go, Sarah said quietly. There's no shame in staying here helping me with the boarding house until something else comes along. Emily looked out the window at Luke checking the horse's hooves with practiced care. I know, but I think I need to see what's out there. I came west for something different. Maybe Elk Creek is it. Sarah hugged her impulsively. You've got courage, Emily Carter. More than you know. The sun was just breaking the horizon when Luke helped Emily onto Buttercup. He'd attached a lead rope to the mare's bridle, tying it to his own saddle, a consideration that touched her. Ready? He asked, mounting his own horse, a rangy bay gelding. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. Ready or not, she was going. The first few miles were torture. Every muscle she didn't know she had screamed in protest, and she had to concentrate on simply staying upright. Luke set an easy pace, checking on her frequently without making her feel incompetent. Gets easier, he said after one particularly ungraceful moment when Buttercup stepped over a fallen branch. When, Emily gasped. About the time we reach Elk Creek, he said, and she thought she caught the ghost of a smile. As they rode, the landscape opened up around them in a way that took Emily's breath away. She'd seen countryside from the train and stage, but this was different. This was immersion. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching from horizon to horizon, without a single building to break its sweep. Hawks circled overhead, and she could hear meadowlarks calling from the tall grass. It's so empty, she said, then immediately regretted it. I mean, not empty, just big, Luke finished. Yeah, it takes some getting used to. First time I saw the ocean during the war reminded me of home. All that space with nothing to fill it but possibility. You've seen the ocean. Briefly, we were stationed near the coast for a few weeks. Most of the boys had never seen so much water. I kept thinking it looked like the prairie, only blue instead of gold. They stopped at midday by a small stream to water the horses and eat Sarah's packed lunch. Emily practically fell off Buttercup, her legs barely supporting her. Walk around a bit, Luke advised. Work out the stiffness. She hobbled along the stream bank while he tended the horses. The water was clear enough to see stones on the bottom, nothing like the murky rivers she knew back east. Mountain runoff, Luke explained, joining her. Snowmelt from the peaks. Stays cold even in summer. It's beautiful, Emily said, then laughed. I keep saying that about everything. Because it is. He picked up a flat stone, skipped it across a deeper pool. Different kind of beautiful than what you're used to, I expect. But beautiful all the same. Emily found her own stone, tried to skip it. It sank immediately. Like this, Luke said, moving behind her, his hand covering hers to show the proper wrist motion. Sidearm, not overhand. She was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him against her back, his breath near her ear. The stone flew from her hand, skipping twice before sinking. Better, he said, stepping away quickly, as if he too had felt the sudden charge between them. They reached the Olmsted Ranch by late afternoon. It was a modest spread, a 2-story house, a barn corrals with a few horses, fields stretching toward distant mountains. Children came running as they approached, 4 of them, ranging from perhaps 5 to 12. Mr. Luke! Mr. Luke! The youngest shouted. Did you bring our wagon? Sure did, Samuel, Luke said, dismounting. Your paw around. A man emerged from the barn, tall and lean with sun-weathered features. Luke, good to see you. This the new teacher we heard about. Emily was startled. Heard about? Luke looked slightly embarrassed. Sent word ahead with Tom Brennan yesterday. Figured it would be good if folks knew you were coming. The evening with the Olmsteds passed pleasantly. Mary Olmsted was a cheerful woman who seemed thrilled to have female company, and the children peppered Emily with questions about Philadelphia, about schools, about everything. We've been teaching them at home, Mary confided, but there's only so much I can do with the farm work and the baby. She gestured to the infant sleeping in a cradle by the fire. Elk Creek needs a real teacher so badly. What happened to the last one? Emily asked. Mary and her husband Jacob exchanged glances. There hasn't been a last one, Jacob said. We built the schoolhouse hoping someone would come. You'd be the first. The weight of that responsibility settled on Emily's shoulders. Not replacing someone, but beginning something entirely new. That night, lying in the Olmsted spare room, Emily could hear Luke talking quietly with Jacob on the porch below. Their voices were low, but she caught fragments, something about winter supplies, about the road to Elk Creek, about keeping an eye on things. In the morning, Jacob offered to ride with them to Elk Creek. Want to see about selling some cattle to the settlement, he explained, but Emily suspected it had more to do with Luke's request to keep an eye on things. The road to Elk Creek was rougher than yesterday's journey. They had to ford 2 streams, navigate rocky passages that had Emily clinging to the saddle horn. But then they crested a rise, and there it was. Elk Creek spread out in a valley below them, perhaps 24 buildings clustered along an actual creek, with farms spreading out like spokes from the central hub. The schoolhouse stood slightly apart, painted white with a bell tower that gleamed in the morning sun. It's perfect, Emily breathed. Luke glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Wait until you've seen it up close before deciding that. But as they rode down into the settlement, Emily's first impression only strengthened. The buildings were simple but well-maintained. Gardens showed careful tending. Children played in yards while women hung washing and men worked in the fields. It was alive in a way that had nothing to do with size or sophistication. Word of their arrival spread quickly. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, a small crowd had gathered. A man who introduced himself as Robert Mackenzie, apparently the informal leader of the settlement, stepped forward. Miss Carter, we heard you might be coming. Can't tell you how happy we are to see you. Emily dismounted with more grace than she'd managed yesterday, though her legs still shook. Mr. Mackenzie, I understand you need a teacher. Desperately, he said frankly. We've got 32 children of school age, more coming as families settle. We can offer $60 a month plus the teacher's quarters and meals provided by families on a rotating basis. Emily blinked. It was more than she'd made at Mrs. Whitman's academy. I'd like to see the schoolhouse, if I may. The tour was brief but encouraging. The main room was simple benches for students, a desk for the teacher, a good stove for winter heat, windows on two sides for light. Slates were stacked in a corner along with a few precious books. We've been collecting what we could, Robert explained. Everyone contributed something. The teacher's quarters were through a connecting door, one room with a bed. Small stove table, 2 chairs, and a trunk for belongings. Basic, but clean and private. When would you need an answer? Emily asked. Take all the time you... Now, interrupted a woman who'd pushed to the front of the crowd. We need an answer now. Our children have waited long enough. Emily looked at the faces around her, hopeful, determined, desperate for what she could offer. She thought of the telegram of sitting on those cold station steps. She thought of Luke's words about the children needing someone like her. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll take the position. The cheer that went up could probably be heard back in Cottonwood. Women surrounded her immediately, talking over each other about meal schedules and washing arrangements, and which children were apt students and which would need firm handling. Through the crowd, Emily caught Luke's eye. He stood apart holding the horses, but he was smiling. Really smiling for the first time since she'd met him. When their eyes met, he touched the brim of his hat in a small salute. Robert Mackenzie was pumping her hand enthusiastically. You won't regret this, Miss Carter. Elk Creek takes care of its own. When can you start? I need to collect my things from Cottonwood, Emily said, reality setting in. Perhaps a week. I can bring her belongings out, Luke said, stepping forward, along with any supplies she needs for the school. That's kind of you, Mr. Harrison, Emily said formally, aware of all the eyes on them. Just being neighborly, he replied, but there was warmth in his eyes that suggested more. The ride back to Cottonwood passed in a blur of exhaustion and exhilaration. Jacob Olmsted had stayed in Elk Creek to negotiate his cattle sale, so it was just Emily and Luke on the trail. She was too tired to be nervous about the proximity, too overwhelmed by the day's events to maintain any sort of proper distance. You did good today, Luke said as they stopped again at the stream. I didn't do anything except say yes. Sometimes that's everything. He helped her down from Buttercup, his hand steady at her waist. Those people have been waiting 2 years for someone to say yes. Why did you really help me? Emily asked suddenly. And don't say neighborliness. You went out of your way, vouched for me to people who trust you. Why? Luke was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the prairie. Maybe because I remember what it's like to have everything pulled out from under you. Maybe because Sarah would have skinned me alive if I'd left you on those steps. He paused. Or maybe because when I saw you there fighting not to give up, I saw someone who deserved a chance. And now, he turned to look at her directly, now I see someone who's going to change lives in Elk Creek. Those children don't know how lucky they are yet. The intensity in his gaze made Emily's heart race. I'm terrified, she admitted. What if I fail? What if I can't handle the isolation, the challenges? You won't fail, Luke said with such certainty it took her breath away. You're stronger than you think, and you won't be alone. The Olmsteds are good people, and the settlement will support you, and... He hesitated, then continued, I make deliveries to Elk Creek regularly. You'll see familiar faces. The promise in those words warmed Emily more than the afternoon sun. I'm glad, she said softly. I'd hate to think I'd never see you again after all this. Something shifted in Luke's expression, a vulnerability that made him look younger. Emily, Miss Carter? Emily, she corrected. I think we're past formalities, don't you? Emily? He repeated her name, soft on his lips. I should tell you, I don't have much to offer anyone. The livery does well enough, but I'm just a stable owner with a bad leg and too many memories of war. You should know that before... Before what? Emily challenged, stepping closer. Before I start looking forward to those Elk Creek deliveries more than I should, he finished quietly. Emily reached out, touched his hand where it rested on the saddle. I'm just a failed Philadelphia teacher who cried on station steps and can barely ride a horse, Maybe we're both more than we think. Luke turned his hand over, fingers interlacing with hers. For a moment they stood there connected by more than just clasped hands, and Emily felt the possibility of something she hadn't come west looking for, but might have found anyway. Then Buttercup nickered, impatiently breaking the spell, and they separated, continuing their journey with a new awareness crackling between them. Sarah was waiting anxiously when they arrived back in Cottonwood after dark. "Well," she demanded before they'd even dismounted. "I'm the new teacher of Elk Creek," Emily announced, and Sarah whooped in a very unladylike manner. "I knew it. Oh, we have so much to do. You'll need supplies and we should alter those other dresses and—" "Sarah," Luke interrupted fondly, "let her eat first and rest. She's been in the saddle for 2 days." That night, as Sarah plotted and planned, Emily found herself watching Luke across the kitchen table. He was quiet as always, but she caught him looking at her too, and when their eyes met, the promise of those delivery runs to Elk Creek hung between them. "I should write to my mother," Emily said eventually. "Tell her about the position." "Tell her you're safe," Luke suggested. "Tell her you're happy. The rest can wait until you're sure." "I'm sure," Emily said, and realized she was. Sure about Elk Creek, about teaching children who really needed her about this new life she was building, and maybe, just maybe, sure about the quiet man across from her who'd shown her that starting over wasn't failure, but courage. The week preparing to move to Elk Creek passed quickly. Sarah attacked the preparations with military efficiency while Luke arranged for supplies the school would need. Emily spent her days helping Sarah with the boarding house work, learning the practical skills she'd need living alone, how to bank a fire to last the night, how to make bread with unpredictable yeast, how to patch and darn and make things last. In the evenings, Luke would appear often with something for her classroom, a map he'd found in the general store, a box of precious chalk, a dictionary that had belonged to his mother. "You don't need to keep buying things," Emily protested one evening as he presented her with a brass bell for calling students to class. "I'm not buying them all," he said. "People hear you're going to Elk Creek. They want to contribute. Mrs. Chen sent the chalk. Pastor Mills donated some primers. The town's invested in your success, Emily." The night before her departure, Sarah insisted on a farewell dinner. Pastor Mills came and Mrs. Chen and Tom Brennan, who'd spread the word about Emily in the first place. It was the kind of gathering Emily remembered from Philadelphia, warm, communal, celebrating transitions, but somehow more genuine. "You'll do wonderful things," Pastor Mills said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "Education is the foundation of civilization. Those children in Elk Creek will be better citizens because of you." After the guests left and Sarah retired, Emily found Luke on the porch, looking out at the stars. They were brilliant here, undimmed by city lights, countless and eternal. "Nervous?" he asked as she joined him. "Terrified," she admitted, "but excited too. Is that strange? That's human." He was quiet for a moment. "I have something for you." He pulled a small package from his pocket wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a cameo brooch, delicate and obviously old. "It was my mother's," he said as Emily gasped. "She was a teacher too before she married my father. Taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Kansas. I thought she'd want you to have it." "Luke, I can't." "Yes, you can." His fingers closed hers around the brooch. "Consider it a loan if you must, but wear it. For luck, for courage, for remembering you have friends in Cottonwood." Emily stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a brief, soft touch that left them both breathless. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Luke had loaded a wagon with Emily's belongings and the school supplies, and Buttercup was saddled for the journey. Sarah cried as she hugged Emily goodbye, making her promise to write to visit, to not let the isolation defeat her. "You're stronger than you know," Sarah said fiercely. "Remember that when things get hard." The journey to Elk Creek felt different this time. Emily knew what to expect from the road from Buttercup, from the landscape that was beginning to feel less foreign. Luke was quieter than usual, and she wondered if he was feeling the same bittersweetness. She was glad for her opportunity, but aware that it meant separation. When they reached Elk Creek, it seemed the entire settlement had turned out. Children ran alongside the wagon, women called out greetings, men nodded respectfully. Emily's new life was beginning with an audience, with expectations, with hope she prayed she could fulfill. Luke helped unload her belongings into the teacher's quarters, arranging furniture, stacking books, making sure the stove was working properly. When everything was done, he stood awkwardly by the door. "I'll be back in 2 weeks with supplies for Brennan's store," he said. "If you need anything before then, send word with anyone heading to Cottonwood." "I will," Emily promised. Then, because the children were watching through the windows and propriety mattered here, she offered her hand formally. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for everything." He took her hand, held it perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Good luck, Miss Carter, though you won't need it." Then he was gone, and Emily stood in her new home, her new classroom, her new life. Through the window, she watched his wagon disappear over the rise, already counting the days until his return. That evening, as she prepared her first lessons by lamplight, Emily fingered the cameo brooch pinned to her collar. 2 weeks ago, she'd been nobody going nowhere crying on cold station steps. Now she was Miss Carter, teacher of Elk Creek, wearing a piece of history given by a man who saw her strength when she couldn't see it herself. Outside, she could hear families settling in for the night, children being called to bed, dogs barking, life continuing in its eternal rhythm. Tomorrow, 32 children would walk through her door expecting her to teach them not just reading and arithmetic, but how to be citizens of this vast, challenging, promising land. Emily opened her mother's letter, the one that had arrived just before she left Cottonwood. It was full of worry, disappointment, confusion about her choices. But at the bottom in her mother's careful script were words that brought tears to Emily's eyes. "Though I don't understand your path, I pray you find what you're seeking." Looking around her simple room, thinking of Luke's promise to return, of Sarah's fierce friendship of children eager to learn, Emily thought she might have found it already. Not what she'd come west seeking, but something better, more real, more hers. The candle flickered in a draft from under the door, and Emily rose to bank the fire for the night. Tomorrow would bring challenges she couldn't yet imagine, but tonight she was home. Not the home she'd planned, but the home she'd needed. And 15 miles away in Cottonwood, Luke Harrison stood in his own doorway, looking north toward Elk Creek, counting days and fighting hope, and thinking of a woman brave enough to begin again. The school bell rang out across Elk Creek Valley for the first time at 8 o'clock sharp, its bronze voice carrying over fields and into homes, announcing a new era. Emily stood in the doorway watching her students arrive, some running eagerly, others hanging back shyly, all scrubbed clean and dressed in their best clothes for this momentous first day. "Good morning, Miss Carter," called out Annie Mackenzie, Robert's daughter, leading a group of younger children. "Good morning, Annie. Please come in and choose a bench." Within 20 minutes, all 32 students had assembled, ranging from 6-year-old Tommy Brennan to 16-year-old Martha Sawyer, who looked almost as nervous as Emily felt. The room smelled of fresh wood and chalk dust, of new beginnings and old hopes finally realized. "Welcome," Emily began, her voice steadier than her hands. "I'm Miss Carter, and I'm honored to be your teacher. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to know each of you. Let's start with names and ages, and tell me one thing you're hoping to learn this year." As the children introduced themselves, Emily mentally cataloged their needs. The younger ones needed basic literacy and numbers. The older students, especially those like Martha, who'd been helping on family farms since childhood, hungered for more advanced learning, history, geography, literature that would connect them to the wider world. "I want to learn about the ocean," said 12-year-old James Paulson. "Pa says it's bigger than the whole prairie, but that can't be true, can it?" "We'll definitely study the oceans," Emily promised, "and you might be surprised by just how vast they are." The first week was a careful dance of establishing routines while gauging abilities. Emily quickly realized her students fell into 3 distinct groups: the youngers who needed foundational skills, the middles who could read but struggled with comprehension and mathematics, and the olders who were ready for more complex subjects but had never had the opportunity. She instituted a system where older students helped younger ones with basic lessons while she worked with different groups throughout the day. Martha Sawyer proved especially helpful, having a natural gift for explaining concepts to the little ones. "You should be a teacher yourself someday," Emily told her after watching her help Tommy Brennan with his letters. Martha blushed. "Women don't do much besides marry out here, Miss Carter. Except for you." "Times are changing," Emily said gently. "You could go to normal school, come back and teach. Elk Creek will grow." They'll need more than one teacher eventually. The girl's eyes lit up with possibilities she'd never considered before. By the end of the second week, Emily had established a rhythm. Mornings for reading and writing, afternoons for arithmetic and geography with history and natural science woven throughout. She'd started a lending library with the few books available, allowing students to take them home one night at a time. It was Friday afternoon when she heard the familiar creak of wagon wheels and looked up to see Luke Harrison pulling into the schoolyard. Her heart jumped in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. She'd been counting the days, though she'd never admit it aloud. The children pressed against the windows, excited by any break in routine. "Is that your beau, Miss Carter?" asked Sarah Olmsted with the frankness of 10-year-olds everywhere. "That's Mr. Harrison from Cottonwood," Emily said firmly, though her cheeks warmed. "He brings supplies to the settlement. Now, everyone back to your readers. School isn't dismissed for another hour." But concentrating proved impossible, especially when Luke knocked and entered hat in hand, looking wonderfully familiar in his work clothes and patient expression. "Sorry to interrupt, Miss Carter. Got those books you ordered from Denver. Thought you'd want them right away." "Books?" Emily stood smoothing her skirts. "I didn't order any books." "Must have been a mistake then," Luke said, but his eyes twinkled in a way that said otherwise. "Got your name on the package, though. Best have a look." Emily opened the crate he carried in, gasping at the contents. A complete set of McGuffey readers, a new Atlas III arithmetic texts, and wonder of wonders, a volume of Shakespeare's plays. "Luke," she breathed, forgetting formality in front of the students. "This must have cost anonymous donation," he said quietly. "Someone in Cottonwood who believes in education. That's all Tom Brennan told me." But Emily saw Sarah's hand in this, probably with Luke's wallet behind it. Tears pricked her eyes as she ran her fingers over the precious books. "Children, come see," she called, and they swarmed forward, eager to touch the new treasures. While the students explored the books, Luke drew Emily aside. "How are you really? Sarah worries you're not eating enough, working too hard." "I'm wonderful," Emily said honestly. "Tired, certainly. But Luke, these children are so eager to learn. Yesterday, James Paulson stayed after school for an hour just to look at the maps. Martha Sawyer has read every book twice. Even the resistant ones are starting to come around." "You've got chalk dust in your hair," Luke said softly, reaching up to brush it away. The gesture was so intimate, so unexpected, that Emily forgot to breathe. "Miss Carter, is this really a book with plays in it?" Tommy Brennan's voice broke the moment. "Yes, Tommy. Shakespeare wrote them to be performed on stage. Perhaps we could put on scenes for the Christmas program." The idea caught fire immediately, children chattering about costumes and parts, while Luke smiled at Emily's enthusiasm. "I should go," he said. "Got deliveries to make. But Emily, there's a harvest festival in Cottonwood in 3 weeks. Music, dancing, food. Sarah particularly wanted me to invite you. She said to tell you she's already made you a dress for it." "I don't know if I can leave." "It's a Saturday," Luke said. "I could come get you Friday evening, bring you back Sunday afternoon. The Olmsteds already said they'd keep an eye on the schoolhouse." Emily felt the weight of 32 pairs of eyes watching this exchange with interest. "I'll consider it," she said formally, though her heart was already saying yes. After Luke left, the children were impossible to settle. Emily finally gave up on formal lessons and let them spend the last hour exploring the new books while she tried to calm her racing thoughts. That evening, Mary Olmsted appeared at her door with a covered dish and a knowing smile. "Saw Luke Harrison's wagon earlier," she said casually. "Nice man. Widower, you know." Emily nearly dropped the dish. "Widower?" "Lost his wife to fever 6 years back, just before he went to war. They'd only been married a year. Tragic thing. He hasn't looked at another woman since, according to my cousin in Cottonwood." Mary's eyes sparkled. "Until now, perhaps." After Mary left, Emily sat by her window, looking out at the vast prairie, processing this information. Luke had lost even more than she'd realized, parents' ranch wife. Yet he'd rebuilt, survived, even thrived. And now he was bringing her books, brushing chalk from her hair, inviting her to festivals. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern that began to feel like home. Teaching filled her days with purpose and joy. Evenings brought visits from various families, each taking turns providing her meals and company. She learned their histories, their hopes, their fears for their children. Robert Mackenzie spoke of his dream to see Elk Creek become a proper town with businesses and churches and civilization. Hans Mueller, who'd emigrated from Germany, wanted his children to be real Americans with education and opportunity. The Sawyers hoped their sons could someday attend university, their daughter make a good marriage. Or become a teacher. Emily always added when the Sawyers mentioned Martha planting seeds of possibility. She wrote long letters to her mother and sister trying to explain this life that bore no resemblance to Philadelphia society. How did she describe the satisfaction of seeing, understanding dawn in a child's eyes, the beauty of prairie sunsets that painted the sky in colors she'd never seen back east, the way silence here wasn't empty but full of wind and birdsong and possibility? She wrote to Sarah, too, carefully. Casual mentions of Luke's visit, knowing his sister would read between every line. The Friday of the Harvest Festival arrived gray and cold with the smell of snow in the air. Emily dismissed school early, the children as excited for her adventure as she was. "You'll dance with Mr. Harrison, won't you?" Martha asked as she helped Emily pack an overnight bag. "I'm going to visit Mrs. Harrison at the boarding house," Emily said primly. "But there will be dancing. Ma says the Harvest Festival has the best dancing all year." Martha's young face was wistful. "I've never been to a real dance." "You will someday," Emily promised, "and you'll have young men fighting for the honor of partnering you." Luke arrived as the sun was setting, dressed in clean clothes, with his hair trimmed and his boots polished. Emily had never seen him look so formally turned out, and it made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with the wagon ride ahead. "You look lovely," he said simply as he helped her up to the wagon seat. Emily smoothed the wool skirt Sarah had altered for her, glad she'd taken extra care with her hair and worn the cameo brooch. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." They rode in comfortable silence, at first the prairie spreading out around them in the gathering dusk. Then Luke began pointing out landmarks, telling stories of the land and its settlement. "That rise there? That's where the Cheyenne used to camp before the treaty pushed them north. You can still find arrowheads sometimes." He pointed to a cluster of cottonwoods. "Those trees mark an old creek bed. Water still runs underground there. The Olmsted's well taps into it." "You know every inch of this land," Emily observed. "Have to running the livery. Need to know where water is, where shelter is, which routes are safest in different weather." He glanced at her. "The snow holds off, but next month the real winter starts. You prepared for that?" "The families have been generous with advice and supplies. Mrs. Mueller knitted me mittens, and Robert Mackenzie made sure I have enough firewood." "They take care of their own," Luke agreed, "and you're theirs now." The casual inclusion in that statement warmed Emily more than her heavy coat. They reached Cottonwood after full dark, the town lit up with lanterns for the festival. The main street had been transformed with booths selling food and crafts games for children, and a large area cleared for dancing near the church. A fiddle and accordion were already playing, and couples swirled in the lamplight. Sarah descended on them, immediately hugging Emily as if they'd been separated for months rather than weeks. "Oh, you look wonderful." "Teaching agrees with you. Come, I have your dress ready at the boarding house. Luke, go make yourself useful. We'll meet you at the dance in an hour." Emily found herself swept away to the boarding house, where Sarah had indeed prepared a dress, deep blue wool with black trim, fashionable but still appropriate for a schoolteacher. "Sarah, this is too much." "Nonsense, I had the fabric already and you need something special for occasions. Can't have you wearing the same teaching clothes to every social event." Sarah helped her with the buttons. "Now tell me everything. How are the children, the families? And don't think I didn't notice how Luke looked at you." Emily blushed, recounting her weeks in Elk Creek, while Sarah did her hair pinning it up in a more elaborate style than Emily ever managed alone. "And Luke's been kind bringing supplies and books," Emily finished. "Books you didn't order, I assume?" Sarah smiled knowingly. "That man hasn't spent money on anything but necessities for 6 years. Now suddenly he's buying educational materials." "Interesting." Sarah Mary Olmsted mentioned, she said Luke was married before. Sarah's hand stilled in Emily's hair. "Yes, Rebecca. They were young, only 18 when they married. She died of scarlet fever the first winter. Luke blamed himself for not having enough money for the doctor, though Doc Murphy said there was nothing could have been done." She resumed pinning. He closed himself off after that, then the war came, and when he returned, I thought he'd given up on anything beyond survival. Until you arrived. We're just friends. Emily Carter. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him the same way when you think no one's watching. Sarah turned Emily to face the mirror. There. Beautiful. Emily barely recognized herself. The dress brought out her eyes, and Sarah's skilled hands had transformed her usually practical hairstyle into something elegant. She looked like she belonged at a Philadelphia society gathering, yet somehow also like she belonged here in this frontier town where elegance meant something different. The dance was in full swing when they arrived. The cold had driven everyone to dance vigorously, and the makeshift floor vibrated with energy. Children ran between adults' legs, while older folks sat on benches around the edges gossiping and watching the young people court. Emily spotted Luke immediately standing with Tom Brennan near the refreshment table. When he saw her, his expression shifted to something she'd never seen before, a mixture of admiration and longing that made her breath catch. He crossed to them immediately, and Tom Brennan whistled low. Miss Carter, you're a vision. No wonder Luke's been making extra trips to Elk Creek. Tom, Luke said warningly, but he was smiling as he offered Emily his arm. Would you honor me with a dance? So the fiddler had just started a waltz slower and more intimate than the previous reels. Luke led her onto the floor with surprising grace despite his slight limp, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with careful propriety. You dance well, Emily said, trying not to notice how natural it felt to be in his arms. My mother insisted both Sarah and I learn, said you never knew when proper manners would matter. He spun her gently. I'm glad now. Been a long time since I had a reason to remember the steps. They moved together easily, as if they'd done this before. Emily was aware of people watching, of whispers and speculation, but she couldn't bring herself to care. The world narrowed to Luke's eyes, the warmth of his hand, the way he held her like something precious. Emily, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. But before he could continue, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A woman had entered, blonde, elegantly dressed despite the frontier setting, scanning the crowd with determined purpose. When her gaze landed on Luke, she smiled brilliantly and started forward. Luke's hand tightened on Emily's waist. Charlotte, he breathed, and Emily felt him tense as if preparing for battle. The woman approached with the confidence of someone used to getting their way. She was beautiful in a polished way that made Emily suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and frontier styling. Luke Harrison, Charlotte said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of Eastern education. I heard you were here. It's been too long. Charlotte, Luke said stiffly, having stopped dancing but not released Emily. I didn't know you were back in Cottonwood. Just arrived yesterday. Father's expanding his business interests here. Her gaze shifted to Emily, dismissive and evaluating at once. Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend? Miss Emily Carter. This is Miss Charlotte Whitmore. Emily is the new teacher at Elk Creek. How admirable, Charlotte said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Teaching frontier children must be quite an adjustment from wherever you came from. Boston, New York. Philadelphia, Emily replied, lifting her chin slightly. Oh, I adore Philadelphia. I spent a season there 2 years ago. The Whitman Academy Circle was particularly delightful. You wouldn't happen to know the Dennison family. Harold Dennison is such a charming man. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Of course, Charlotte would know, Harold would know exactly the social circle Emily had fled. I'm acquainted with the Dennisons, Emily said carefully. More than acquainted from what Harold told me. Charlotte laughed, a tinkling sound that carried. He was quite devastated when you disappeared west. Something about breaking and understanding. Though he seems to have recovered well enough. His engagement to the Pemberton heiress was announced last month. The words hit Emily like physical blows, not because she cared about Harold's engagement, but because Charlotte had so effectively painted her as a woman who'd fled a failed romance, diminishing her in front of everyone listening. Luke stepped forward slightly. Miss Carter came west to teach, to make a difference in children's lives. Takes courage to leave everything familiar for something meaningful. Charlotte's perfect smile faltered slightly. Of course. How noble. She touched Luke's arm with casual intimacy. Luke, we simply must catch up properly. Perhaps tomorrow I have some business propositions that might interest you regarding the livery. I'm taking Miss Carter back to Elk Creek tomorrow, Luke said firmly. Surely that can wait. After all, frontier teachers must be used to managing alone. Charlotte's implication was clear. Emily wasn't important enough to prioritize. No, Luke said simply. It can't wait. If you'll excuse us, Miss Whitmore, we were dancing. He guided Emily back into the dance, leaving Charlotte standing alone, her beautiful face marred by surprise and anger. I'm sorry, Luke said quietly as they resumed waltzing. Charlotte and there was an understanding once before the war. She chose someone wealthier. He died last year, which is presumably why she's back. You don't owe me explanations. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. Emily, these past weeks getting to know you, seeing you with the children the way you've embraced this life, I need you to know that whatever Charlotte implies, she means nothing to me now. Less than nothing. Emily's heart was racing, but she forced herself to ask, and Harold Dennison, should I explain? Only if you want to. Your past is yours. What matters is who you are now here. They danced in silence for a moment. Then Emily said, he wanted to marry me for my organizational skills and good breeding. I would have managed his household and raised his children while he lived his real life at his club with his real friends. When I told him about the teaching position out west, he laughed, said I'd be back within a month properly chastened and ready to be sensible. Fool, Luke said succinctly, his loss. Charlotte's too, Emily added softly and was rewarded by Luke's smile. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances and conversations. Charlotte held court near the refreshment table, gathering admirers and dispensing gossip, but her eyes frequently found Luke and Emily. Sarah, protective as a mother bear, stayed close to Emily's side whenever Luke was called away for business discussions. Don't let that viper bother you, Sarah said bluntly. She had her chance with Luke and threw it away for money. Now that she's discovered money doesn't buy happiness, she thinks she can crook her finger and have him back. They have history, Seth. Ancient history, Sarah interrupted. You have present and future if you both stop being so careful and proper. Near midnight, Luke found Emily sitting with Sarah resting her feet after hours of dancing. Would you like to see something? He asked. Won't take long. Curious Emily followed him outside and down a side street to a small rise at the edge of town. From there they could see the entire valley spread out under stars, the festival lights twinkling below. It's beautiful, Emily breathed. This is where I came when I first got back from the war, Luke said. Everything was gone, Parents Ranch Rebecca. I stood here thinking about leaving, starting completely fresh somewhere. Nobody knew my failures. He paused. Sarah found me here, dragged me back, made me see that running wouldn't change anything. That building something new was better than chasing something lost. Why are you telling me this? Luke turned to face her. Because I want you to know I understand starting over. And I want you to know that Charlotte showing up doesn't change anything. She's the past. I'm what? Emily prompted when he hesitated. You're the first person who's made me think about the future in 6 years, he said quietly. Really think about it, not just survive toward it. Emily's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Luke, I know it's too soon, he rushed on. I know you've got your teaching your new life, and you don't need complications. But Emily, I had to tell you before Charlotte fills your head with doubts that you matter to me. More than I expected. More than I probably have any right to. Emily reached up, touched his face gently, feeling the roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. You matter to me too. These past weeks, knowing you'd come with supplies, having that to look forward to, it's been the bright spot that got me through the hard days. He covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek. There's no rush. I know you need time to establish yourself, to be sure this life is what you want. I just needed you to know where I stand. I know, Emily whispered. And Luke Charlotte was wrong. This isn't about running from Harold or Philadelphia or anything else. This is about running towards something, teaching the children this place. She paused. You. He kissed her, then gentle and careful, as if she might disappear like prairie mist. Emily had been kissed before Harold's possessive, claiming a few fumbling attempts by boys back home, but never like this. Never with such tenderness, such promise, such recognition of finding something unexpected and precious. When they parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers. I should get you back. Sarah will skin me alive if I keep you out here in the cold. They walked back hand in hand, not caring who saw, not caring what Charlotte might say. The festival was winding down, couples collecting children, merchants packing up booths. Sarah took one look at them and smiled triumphantly. About time, she said simply. Now come inside before you both freeze. That night, lying in the familiar bed at the boarding house, Emily touched her lips, still feeling Luke's kiss. Tomorrow there would be complications, Charlotte's inevitable attempts to interfere the long journey back to Elk Creek, the reality of maintaining a courtship across 15 miles of prairie. But tonight she felt more settled than she had since leaving Philadelphia. She'd come west looking for a teaching position and found so much more: a community, a purpose, a man who saw her strength when she couldn't see it herself. Whatever challenges came, she would meet them because she was no longer the woman crying on station steps. She was Miss Carter of Elk Creek, and she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning brought awkwardness and wonder in equal measure. Luke appeared for breakfast, and they exchanged shy smiles over Sarah's knowing looks. The ease of last night's dancing had been replaced by awareness of what had changed between them. The weather's holding, Luke said, consulting the window. We should make good time back to Elk Creek. I'll pack some food for the journey, Sarah announced. And Emily, that blue dress is yours for the next dance. There'll be a Christmas social, Luke added, if you'd like to come back for it. I'd like that, Emily said softly. They were loading the wagon when Charlotte appeared, dressed in an elaborate riding habit that belonged in Central Park, not Cottonwood's dusty streets. Luke, surely you have time for coffee before you leave. She positioned herself between him and the wagon. Father has a business proposition that could be very lucrative for you. Not interested, Luke said shortly, continuing to secure Emily's bags. You haven't even heard it. Really, Luke, don't let your pride cost you opportunity. Charlotte's gaze flicked to Emily. After all, if you're thinking of additional responsibilities, you'll need financial security. The implication was clear. Emily was a burden Luke couldn't afford. I have all the security I need, Luke replied. The livery does well, I own my property free and clear, and I don't need your father's money or his strings. Still so stubborn, Charlotte sighed dramatically. I remember when that was charming. Now it just seemed provincial. Emily had heard enough. Mr. Harrison's integrity isn't provincial, Miss Whitmore. It's admirable. Not everyone measures success by wealth alone. Charlotte's laugh was sharp. How refreshingly naive, though I suppose frontier school teaching doesn't require much worldliness. It requires dedication, patience, and genuine care for others' well-being, Emily responded calmly. Qualities that translate anywhere, even in Philadelphia's finest drawing rooms. After all, I've navigated both, which gives me perspective on what truly matters. For once, Charlotte seemed at a loss for words. Luke helped Emily onto the wagon seat with perhaps more care than necessary, his hand lingering on hers. Miss Whitmore, he said with formal politeness, then clicked to the horses. As they pulled away, Emily saw Charlotte standing in the street, her beautiful face twisted with fury, and something else, genuine loss perhaps, at seeing clearly what she'd thrown away. That was well done, Luke said once they'd cleared town. Charlotte's not used to people standing up to her. I've known too many Charlottes, Emily replied. They only have power if you give it to them. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the events of last night settling between them like dust after wind. Finally, Luke spoke. I meant what I said, about taking time, not rushing anything. I know, and I appreciate it, but Luke, Emily gathered her courage. I don't need as much time as you might think. I know my own mind, my own heart. I've known since you found me on those station steps that you were different, special. Even learning about Rebecca, about Charlotte, especially then. You've lost and rebuilt, loved and grieved, and yet you still had room in your heart for kindness to a stranger. She touched his hand where it held the reins. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Luke turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. When I saw you crying that night, something in me recognized something in you. Like calling to like maybe. Two people who'd been broken, but refused to stay that way. They stopped at the usual spot by the stream for lunch and to rest the horses. This time, when Luke helped Emily down from the wagon, he held her a moment longer and she rested her head against his chest, hearing his heartbeat strong and steady. "I don't want to compromise your reputation," he said into her hair. "The families in Elk Creek trust you with their children. Then we'll be careful proper. You'll court me like a gentleman and I'll be a perfectly respectable schoolteacher." She looked up at him smiling. "Who happens to be counting days between supply runs?" He kissed her forehead a gentle blessing. 2 weeks is too long. I'll find reasons to come more often. The children will talk. Let them. Maybe it'll be a good lesson that their teacher deserves happiness too. When they reached Elk Creek, the Sunday afternoon quiet was broken by children running to greet them, eager to hear about the festival. Emily saw curtains twitch in windows, knew the entire settlement would know within hours that she'd returned with Luke Harrison, both of them glowing with barely concealed joy. "I'll help you get settled," Luke said, carrying her bags into the teacher's quarters. Inside, away from watching eyes, he pulled her close once more. 2 weeks, he promised. "Less if I can manage it." "I'll be here," Emily assured him. Teaching conjugations and multiplication tables and probably boring the children with stories about the harvest dance. "Tell them about the teacher who captured the heart of a stubborn livery owner," Luke suggested. "Though they might not believe someone as wonderful as you would look twice at someone like me." "Tell them about the cowboy who rescued a lost teacher and showed her she was already home," Emily countered. After Luke left, Emily stood in her little schoolroom touching the books he'd brought, remembering his words on that rise overlooking Cottonwood. The future stretched before them, uncertain, but no longer solitary. There would be challenges, the harsh winter everyone warned about, Charlotte's inevitable interference, the difficulty of maintaining a courtship across distance. But there would also be Sunday dinners at the boarding house, Christmas socials, the gradual weaving together of two lives that had seemed destined for loneliness until they found each other. Emily picked up her chalk and began writing tomorrow's lessons on the board. Outside, she could hear families preparing for the week ahead, children playing in the last daylight, the eternal wind moving across the prairie. It was the sound of home, real home, chosen and claimed and fought for. And in 2 weeks less, if he could manage it, Luke would return, and they would continue building something neither had dared hope for when she sat crying on those cold station steps. The chalk squeaked against the slate as she wrote, and Emily smiled. Tomorrow, 32 children would fill this room with noise and questions and energy. She would teach them about the ocean that James couldn't believe was bigger than the prairie, about the mathematics that would help them run farms and businesses, about the literature that would show them worlds beyond Elk Creek. But mostly, she would teach them by example that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it, that starting over wasn't failure, but opportunity, and that sometimes the very thing you thought had ended your dreams was actually their beginning. The first snow came 3 days later, transforming Elk Creek into a world of white silence that reminded Emily how far she truly was from Philadelphia's soot-stained winters. She stood at the schoolhouse window watching fat flakes drift past, worried about the children who had farther to walk. But they all arrived red-cheeked and excited, stomping snow from their boots and filling the room with chatter about sledding and ice fishing. "Miss Carter, will you come sledding with us at lunch?" Tommy Brennan asked hopefully. "Perhaps we should focus on our lessons first," Emily said, though she was tempted. The snow called to something childlike in her, a part that Philadelphia's propriety had nearly smothered. The morning passed with the children distracted by the weather, and Emily finally gave in, dismissing them early for lunch, with permission to sled on the hill behind the schoolhouse. She watched from the doorway as they shrieked with joy, their laughter carrying across the white landscape. "You should join them." Emily spun around to find Luke standing behind her, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. Her heart leaped at the unexpected sight of him. "Luke, what are you doing here? It's only been 3 days." "Storm coming," he said, but his eyes were warm with something that had nothing to do with weather concerns. "Wanted to make sure you had enough firewood supplies. These early storms can last days." "Mr. Harrison," the children called out, abandoning their sleds to swarm around him. "Did you bring candy from town?" Luke laughed, producing a bag of peppermint sticks from his coat. "One each, and only if Miss Carter says it's all right." Emily nodded, trying to appear stern while fighting a smile. The children grabbed their treasures and ran back to sledding, leaving Luke and Emily alone in the doorway. "You didn't really come because of the storm," she said softly. "No," he admitted. "I came because 3 days felt like 3 weeks. Foolish, I know." "Not foolish," Emily said, reaching for his cold hand. "I've been counting hours." They stood there, hands clasped, watching the children play, until Martha Sawyer called out, "Miss Carter, Mr. Harrison, come sledding with us." Luke raised an eyebrow at Emily. "When's the last time you went sledding?" "I was 12, Emily admitted. "Mother said it wasn't ladylike." "Well, your mother isn't here," Luke said with a grin that transformed his serious face. "Come on, teacher, show your students you're human." What followed was an hour of pure joy that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. Luke fashioned a sled from a piece of old barn siding, and they flew down the hill together, Emily shrieking with laughter, dignity abandoned. The children cheered them on, delighted to see their proper teacher covered in snow, her hair coming loose from its pins. When they finally trudged back to the schoolhouse, wet and breathless, Emily felt younger than she had in years. Luke helped her shake the snow from her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "You have snow in your eyelashes," he said softly, brushing them with gentle fingers. "Miss Carter's beau is sweet on her," little Sarah Olmsted announced, and the other children giggled. Emily knew she should correct them, maintain proper distance, but looking at Luke's face, seeing her own joy reflected there, she couldn't bring herself to deny what was becoming obvious to everyone. "Back to lessons," she said instead, ushering the children inside. "Mr. Harrison needs to return to town before the storm arrives." But Luke lingered, helping her stoke the stove and checking her wood supply. "There's enough here for a week," he said. "The Olmsteds will check on you if the storm lasts longer. And Emily," he paused at the door, "I'll come back as soon as the roads are clear." "Be safe," she whispered, and he touched her cheek before heading out into the increasing snow. The storm hit that night with a fury that rattled the schoolhouse windows and sent snow sliding under the door. Emily kept the fire burning high grading papers by lamplight while wind howled around the corners of the building. She thought of Luke in Cottonwood, wondered if he was thinking of her, and felt warm despite the cold pressing in from outside. School was canceled for 3 days while the storm raged. Emily used the time to prepare lessons, mend clothes, and read one of the precious books Luke had brought. On the second day, Jacob Olmsted fought through the drifts to check on her, bringing soup and bread for Mary. "Luke Harrison sent word through Tom Brennan," Jacob said, stamping snow from his boots. "Wanted to make sure you were all right. Tom says Luke's been pacing the livery like a caged bear, worried about you out here." The knowledge that Luke was thinking of her, worrying about her, sent warmth through Emily's chest. "Please tell Tom to tell him I'm fine, safe and warm." Jacob grinned. "I'll pass it along, though I suspect Luke won't stop fretting until he can see for himself. Never seen that man so taken with anyone." When the storm finally cleared, the world was transformed. Drifts reached halfway up the schoolhouse windows, and the prairie stretched white and pristine to the horizon. The children returned full of stories about being snowed in, about fathers digging paths to barns, about mothers rationing supplies. "My pa says this is just the beginning," James Paulson announced. "Says the real winter hasn't even started yet." Emily shivered at the thought, but put on a brave face. "Then we'll be prepared for it, won't we? Speaking of which, let's study how animals survive winter. Who can tell me how rabbits stay warm?" 2 days after the storm, Luke arrived with a wagon load of supplies and a determined expression. Emily was teaching arithmetic when she heard the wagon, and her heart jumped as it always did at his arrival. "Continue with your problems," she told the class, stepping outside. Luke was unloading crates, but he stopped when he saw her, his face lighting up. "You're all right." "Of course I am. Did you doubt it? Every minute of that storm." He came closer, and Emily saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the worry he'd carried. "I kept thinking about you out here alone. What if the roof gave way? What if you ran out of wood?" "Luke," she interrupted gently, "I'm fine. The schoolhouse is solid. The families look out for me, and I'm stronger than I appear." I know," he said, pulling her into his arms, despite the fact that children's faces were pressed against the windows. "I know you're strong, but I still worry. Can't seem to help it." Emily let herself rest against him for a moment, feeling his heartbeat through his coat. "I worried about you too," The roads must have been treacherous. Worth it, he murmured into her hair. Emily, I need to tell you something. She pulled back to look at him, alarmed by his serious tone. What is it? Charlotte's father has been spreading rumors in town about you, about why you really left Philadelphia. He's suggesting you had some scandal, that you're not fit to teach children. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. But that's not... I know, Luke said firmly. Everyone who knows you knows it's lies. But some people in Cottonwood are listening, and there's talk of them petitioning to have you removed from your position. Before Emily could respond, Robert Mackenzie approached, having seen the wagon arrive. Luke, Miss Carter, we need to talk. They gathered in the schoolhouse after dismissing the children for an early lunch. Robert's face was grim as he spoke. We've heard the rumors from Cottonwood. Want you to know, Miss Carter, that Elk Creek stands behind you completely. These children have learned more in 2 months than in the previous 2 years of homeschooling. We won't let outside gossip change that. Relief flooded through Emily. Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. I promise you there was no scandal. I simply chose to leave a life that didn't suit me for one that did. Don't need explanations, Robert said firmly. We judge people by what we see, not what others say. But you should know Charlotte Whitmore and her father are coming here tomorrow. They claim they want to assess the situation for the good of the children. Luke's face darkened. They have no authority here. No, but they have influence in Cottonwood, where we get our supplies, our mail, our connection to the railroad. Can't afford to antagonize them completely. Robert looked apologetic. We'll support you, Miss Carter, but you should be prepared for unpleasantness. That night, Emily barely slept. She cleaned the already spotless schoolhouse, arranged and rearranged the children's work displayed on the walls, and practiced what she might say to defend herself. At dawn, she put on her best dress, pinned her hair severely back, and waited. Charlotte arrived in a fancy sleigh just after morning lessons began, accompanied by her father, a portly man with cold eyes, and surprisingly Harold Dennison himself. Emily's knees nearly buckled when she saw Harold, but she forced herself to remain standing tall as they entered her classroom. The children fell silent, sensing tension. Class, we have visitors, Emily said calmly. Please continue with your reading while I speak with them. She stepped outside with her unwelcome guests, where Luke waited, having stayed overnight with the Olmsteads specifically for this confrontation. Emily, Harold said with false warmth, you look, well, different. This frontier life clearly agrees with you. Mr. Dennison, Emily replied coolly, I wasn't aware you had business in Wyoming territory. I came as soon as Charlotte wrote me about finding you here. We were all so worried when you disappeared without a proper goodbye. His tone suggested hurt feelings, but his eyes were calculating. I wrote to my mother explaining my decision. I wasn't aware I owed you any explanation. Charlotte interjected smoothly. Harold was devastated when you broke your engagement. There was no engagement, Emily said firmly. Mr. Dennison made assumptions based on a few chaperoned walks and family dinners. I never accepted his proposal because he never actually made one. He simply assumed I would accept when he got around to asking. Harold's face reddened. Now see here, Emily. We had an understanding. You had an understanding. I had a desire to teach, to do something meaningful with my life beyond organizing your dinner parties and managing your servants. And this is meaningful. Charlotte gestured dismissively at the simple schoolhouse. Teaching farm children their letters in a building smaller than your mother's parlor. Yes, Emily said simply, infinitely more meaningful than anything I did in Philadelphia. Luke stepped forward. Miss Carter has transformed education in Elk Creek. These children now have opportunities they never would have had otherwise. Harold looked Luke up and down dismissively. And you are? Luke Harrison. I own the livery in Cottonwood. The stable hand. Harold laughed unpleasantly. Emily, have your standards really fallen so low? Before Emily could respond, Luke moved. Not aggressively, but with a subtle shift that somehow made him seem larger, more dangerous, his war years showing through his usual quiet demeanor. Mr. Dennison, Luke said quietly, but with steel beneath the words, you're a guest in this community. These people have welcomed you politely despite your uninvited arrival. I suggest you show the same courtesy." Harold stepped back involuntarily, but Charlotte's father intervened. "Gentlemen, please. We're here about the children's welfare. Miss Carter, surely you understand that your irregular situation raises questions about your suitability as a moral example." "What irregular situation?" Emily demanded. "An unmarried woman living alone entertaining a male visitor without proper chaperone." The schoolhouse door burst open and Martha Sawyer emerged, followed by the other older students. "Miss Carter isn't alone," Martha said boldly. "She has all of us, and Mr. Harrison only visits when others are present. We can all testify to that." "Children should be seen, not heard," Charlotte said sharply. "Maybe in your world," Martha shot back, "but Miss Carter teaches us to think to speak up for truth, and the truth is she's the best teacher we could ask for." More children spilled out, and parents began arriving, drawn by word that spread quickly through the settlement. Soon Charlotte and her party were surrounded by the entire population of Elk Creek. Robert Mackenzie stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Dennison. Miss Whitmore, we appreciate your concern, but Elk Creek manages its own affairs. Miss Carter has our complete confidence." "You'd take the word of a woman who fled Philadelphia society over the testimony of respectable people," Charlotte's father demanded. "I'll take the evidence of my own eyes," Mary Olmsted said, pushing through the crowd. "My children can now read and figure. My oldest son talks about attending university someday. That's what Miss Carter brought us, hope and possibility." Harold tried one more time. "Emily, be reasonable. Come back with me. Your mother misses you. I'm willing to overlook this adventure. We can still have the life we planned." "The life you planned," Emily corrected. "Harold, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. I never loved you. I never wanted to marry you. I came west to teach, and I found more happiness in this simple schoolhouse than in all the drawing rooms of Philadelphia. Please leave, all of you." Charlotte's perfect composure finally cracked. "You'll regret this. When winter really comes, when you're completely isolated, when this frontier romance falls apart, then I'll still be teaching," Emily interrupted. "I'll still be making a difference. I'll still be living my own life, not one prescribed by others." Luke moved to stand beside Emily, not touching her, but close enough that his presence was unmistakably supportive. "I think you've heard the lady's answer. And the community's. Time you headed back to Cottonwood." For a moment, violence seemed to hover in the air. Harold's fists clenched. Charlotte's father's face purpled, and several of the Elk Creek men shifted positions, ready to defend their teacher. Then Harold laughed, ugly and dismissive. "You're welcome to her stable hand. She always did have inappropriate democratic notions. Come, Charlotte. Your father was right. There's nothing here worth our time." They left in a flurry of expensive furs and wounded dignity, their sleigh bells sounding almost mocking as they faded into the distance. The crowd remained for a moment. Then Robert Mackenzie said loudly, "Well, that's settled then. Back to work, everyone. Children, back to your lessons." As people dispersed, offering Emily words of support, Luke finally took her hand. "Are you all right?" "I'm free," Emily said wonderingly. "Really, truly free. Harold can't claim any connection to me now, not after I rejected him publicly. And Charlotte can spread whatever gossip she wants. Elk Creek doesn't care." "You were magnificent," Luke said softly. "The way you stood up to them." "We all stood up to them," Emily corrected, looking at Martha Sawyer, who was herding the younger children inside. "This community protected me. Because you're one of us now. Have been since the day you said yes to teaching here." That evening, Luke stayed for dinner with the Olmsteds, and afterward he and Emily walked along the frozen creek in the moonlight. The confrontation with Harold and Charlotte had changed something between them, removed the last barrier of Emily's past. "I should tell you about Rebecca," Luke said suddenly. "You don't have to see—" "I want to." He stopped walking, faced her in the silver light. "We were young, thought we had forever. She was pretty and sweet and never challenged me, never made me think beyond the next season's planting. When she died, I grieved, but Emily, I grieved as much for the future I'd lost as for her specifically." "That sounds terrible." "It sounds honest," Emily said gently. "You were 18. How could you know what deep love really was?" "I know now," Luke said quietly. Because what I feel for you is nothing like what I felt then. You challenge me, make me want to be better, make me think about possibilities I'd given up on. When I worry about you out here, it's not just about losing someone again, it's about losing you specifically. Your laugh, your determination, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on something difficult. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Luke, I love you, he said simply. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, but you, Emily Carter, who came west with dreams and stayed despite disasters, who teaches farm children like they're Philadelphia elite, who stood up to your past today without flinching. I love you too, Emily whispered. Luke Harrison, who rescued a crying stranger and gave her a future, who brings books instead of flowers, who sees me not as I was or could be, but as I am. He kissed her then there by the frozen creek with stars witnessing overhead, and Emily felt her two worlds, the one she'd fled and the one she'd found, finally reconcile into something whole and uniquely hers. Marry me, Luke said against her lips. Not now, I know you need time to establish yourself to be sure, but someday when you're ready, marry me. Yes, Emily said without hesitation. When the school year ends, when I've proven I can do this job completely, then yes. They walked back slowly, planning quietly how Luke would formally court her through the winter, how they'd marry in the spring, how Emily could continue teaching if she wanted, how they'd build a life together that honored both their dreams. Sarah will be insufferable, Luke said with a smile. She'll claim she knew from that first night. She probably did, Emily laughed. She certainly dressed me for that harvest dance with intention. As they reached the schoolhouse, Luke turned serious again. Charlotte and her father will cause trouble in Cottonwood, make business difficult for anyone who supported you. Then we'll deal with it together, all of us. That's what communities do, right? Face challenges together. Together. Luke agreed, pulling her close one more time before propriety demanded they separate. The next months passed in a rhythm of teaching and courtship that felt both timeless and precious. Luke came every week, sometimes twice, always with legitimate business, but always finding time to walk with Emily to help with school repairs, to simply sit by her fire and talk about everything and nothing. The winter Charlotte had warned about did come fierce and isolating at times, but Emily found beauty in it too. Mornings when the frost painted incredible patterns on the windows. Afternoons when the children's voices echoed warm against the cold outside. Evenings when families gathered in rotation, sharing meals and stories, making the isolation feel like intimacy instead. She wrote to her mother about Luke, about her engagement, about the life she was building. The response was predictably concerned, but surprisingly accepting. You always were different, my dear Emily. If this man and this life make you happy, then I suppose that's all a mother can ask. Through it all, Luke was her constant. He brought supplies and gossip from town, helped her weather the storms, both literal and figurative, and loved her with a steadiness that made Harold's dramatic declarations seem shallow by comparison. One evening in late winter, as they sat by her fire while snow fell softly outside, Luke said, Charlotte and her father left Cottonwood yesterday. Business failed. Seems nobody wanted to deal with people who'd attack a schoolteacher's reputation. I'm sorry they failed, Emily said, and meant it. Bitterness is a cold companion. Generous of you. Not generous, practical. Holding on to anger at them would only poison my happiness, and I'm too happy to allow that. Luke pulled her closer on the small settee Robert Mackenzie had built for the teacher's quarters, a courting bench he'd called it, with a wink. The children are planning something for the spring program, Luke said, changing the subject. Martha won't tell me what, but she says you'll love it. They're doing scenes from Shakespeare, Emily said. But there's something else, something secret they work on when they think I'm not paying attention. You know, teachers always know. We just pretend we don't to let students have their surprises. The spring program came on a perfect May evening, the schoolhouse packed with families from Elk Creek, and even some from Cottonwood. Sarah in the front row, beaming like a proud mother. The children performed their Shakespeare scenes beautifully. Martha as a compelling Lady Macbeth. James as a comedic bottom from Midsummer Night's Dream. Then Martha stepped forward. We have something special to present, a story we wrote ourselves about our teacher. What followed was a sweet, fumbling, heartfelt play about a teacher who came from far away to bring light to a frontier town, who fought dragons clearly. Charlotte, though not named, and won the heart of a good man, Luke barely disguised, and who showed children they could be anything they dreamed. Emily cried through the entire thing, Luke holding her hand tightly, and when it ended, the entire audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the rafters. "Did you know?" Emily whispered to Luke. "They swore me to secrecy when they asked for details about how we met. I may have edited out the crying on the station steps." As the evening wound down, Robert Mackenzie stood. "Before we close, I have an announcement. The school board, which is to say all of us, has voted unanimously to offer Miss Carter a permanent position with a raise in salary effective immediately. And we've also voted to begin building a proper house for our teacher, though we understand that might not be needed much longer." More applause, more tears, and Emily felt the last of her Philadelphia self dissolve completely. She was Miss Carter of Elk Creek, soon to be Mrs. Harrison, but always, always a teacher. Later, as Luke drove her home in the wagon, Emily looked up at the vast sky stars scattered like chalk dust across the celestial slate. "Do you ever miss it?" Luke asked. "Philadelphia, the life you would have had." "How can I miss something that was never really mine?" Emily replied. "That life belonged to someone I was pretending to be. This life here with you teaching these children, being part of this community, this belongs to who I really am. No regrets." Emily thought of those cold station steps of crying in the darkness of the moment she'd thought her life was over. Then she thought of Luke's first words to her, of Sarah's fierce kindness of 32 children who'd performed a play about their teacher's courage. "No regrets," she said firmly. "How could I regret the path that brought me home?" Luke pulled the wagon to a stop at the schoolhouse, and they sat for a moment in the quiet night. In 6 weeks, when the school term ended, they would marry in the little church in Cottonwood. Emily would continue teaching, the community had made that clear, married teacher or not. Luke would expand the livery, maybe add a freight service. They would build a house halfway between Cottonwood and Elk Creek, close enough for Emily to ride to school, close enough for Luke to manage his business. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was the life they'd chosen, fought for, built together. "I should go in," Emily said reluctantly. "Tomorrow's a school day." "One more minute," Luke said, pulling her close. "I want to remember this, you and Starlight happy, exactly where you belong." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure as the mountains on the horizon. Tomorrow, there would be lessons to teach children to guide a future to keep building. But tonight, in this perfect moment between one breath and the next, she was simply Emily, who'd traveled west to teach and found so much more love, purpose, community, and the unexpected gift of becoming exactly who she was meant to be. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and perfect, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie in waves of purple and gold. Emily stood in Sarah's room at the boarding house, wearing her mother's wedding dress that had arrived from Philadelphia just days before a gesture of acceptance that had made Emily cry when she opened the package. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Sarah said, adjusting the delicate lace veil. "Luke won't be able to speak when he sees you." "I can barely speak myself," Emily admitted, her hands trembling slightly. 6 months ago, I was crying on those station steps, certain my life was over. Now you're marrying the best man in Wyoming territory and continuing to teach those children who adore you," Sarah finished. "Funny how life works out when you stop trying to force it into the shape you think it should be." Through the window, Emily could see wagons arriving from Elk Creek, her students and their families coming to witness their teacher's happiness. Martha Sawyer had organized the younger children into a choir, and they'd been practicing secretly for weeks. "They're all here for you," Sarah said softly. "The whole community. You did that, Emily. You brought them together, gave them hope for their children's futures." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Mary Olmsted entered with a bouquet of wildflowers tied with ribbon from the general store. "From the children," she said, her eyes misty. "They picked them at sunrise, wanted you to carry something from Elk Creek with you." Emily buried her face in the flowers, overwhelmed by the gesture. These weren't hothouse roses from a Philadelphia florist, but prairie blooms picked by small hands that she'd taught to write flowers that smelled of earth and sky and home. The church was packed beyond capacity, people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. As Emily walked down the aisle on Robert Mackenzie's arm, he'd insisted on the honor since her own father couldn't be there. She saw the faces of all the people who'd become her family. Tom Brennan grinning widely, Mrs. Chin dabbing at her eyes. Pastor Mills beaming with paternal pride, the Olmsteads trying to keep their younger children still, and Martha Sawyer standing tall with the choir ready to sing. But Emily only truly saw Luke standing at the altar in a new suit Sarah had bullied him into buying, his face transformed with joy and wonder. When their eyes met, she saw everything she needed to know. Love, certainty, promise, and that same recognition that had sparked between them from the very beginning. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Pastor Mills asked. "Her community does, Robert Mackenzie said firmly, and a murmur of agreement rippled through the church. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Luke's voice shook slightly as he said his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish, to support her teaching, to build a life together that honored both their dreams. Emily's voice was clear and strong as she promised the same, adding her own vow to stand beside him through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. When Pastor Mills pronounced them married and Luke kissed her, the children's choir burst into song, not a traditional hymn, but something they'd written themselves about their teacher finding love. It was slightly off-key and completely perfect, and Emily had to stop kissing Luke because she was laughing and crying simultaneously. The reception filled the churchyard with tables groaning under the weight of dishes every family had contributed. There was dancing to fiddle music, children running between the adults' legs, and enough laughter to reach the sky. Emily changed into the blue dress from the Harvest Festival for dancing, and she and Luke led the first waltz to much applause. "No regrets?" Luke whispered as they danced, echoing his question from weeks ago. "Only one," Emily whispered back. "That we have to wait until tomorrow to leave for the cabin." Luke had built them a small cabin halfway between Cottonwood and Elk Creek, perfectly positioned for Emily to continue teaching while he managed the expanding livery. They'd spent weekends throughout the spring working on it together, Luke teaching Emily basic carpentry while she planned where furniture would go. "Patience, Mrs. Harrison," Luke said, and Emily shivered happily at her new name. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." As the sun began to set, Harold Dennison's wedding gift arrived, a letter delivered by special messenger. Emily almost didn't open it, but Luke encouraged her to see what final word her former suitor had to say. The letter was brief. "I heard of your marriage from mutual acquaintances. I wish you well in your frontier life. You were right, we never would have suited. I've married Constance Pemberton, and we are quite comfortable together. She has no inappropriate ambitions beyond managing our household. I trust you've found someone who appreciates your peculiar strengths. H.D." Emily passed the letter to Luke, who read it with raised eyebrows. "Peculiar strengths. I think that's the nicest thing Harold ever said about me." Emily laughed. "Poor Constance, though. Comfortable sounds like a cold marriage bed." "Whereas ours will be quite warm," Luke murmured in her ear, making her blush. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, creating pools of golden light. The party showed no signs of ending, but Sarah finally intervened. "All right, everyone, let the newlyweds escape. They've got a journey tomorrow, and school starts again in a week." Amid much good-natured teasing and advice, Emily and Luke made their way to the boarding house where they would spend their wedding night before leaving for their new home. As they walked hand in hand down Cottonwood's main street, Emily remembered walking this same route that first night, broken, and afraid Luke's steady presence the only thing keeping her upright. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About that first night, how you found me at my lowest point and somehow saw something worth saving." Luke stopped, turned her to face him under the stars. "I didn't save you, Emily. You saved yourself. I just offered a hand when you needed one. You did everything else, face down your past, won over. Elk Creek taught those children to dream bigger, made me believe in love again. You saved yourself, and in doing so, you saved me too." Their wedding night was tender and passionate by turns, two people who'd been broken by life, discovering they could be whole together. Luke was gentle, patient, treating Emily like something precious but not fragile, and Emily found a freedom in his arms she'd never imagined possible. The freedom to be completely herself, desired not despite her strengths, but because of them. The next morning, they loaded the wagon with wedding gifts and Emily's belongings from the teacher's quarters. She would keep the room for nights when weather made travel impossible, but the cabin would be their true home. The whole town turned out to see them off, and Emily felt like she was leaving one home for another, expanding her world rather than abandoning anything. The cabin was perfect in its simplicity: 2 rooms plus a loft, windows facing both sunrise and sunset, a porch where they could sit and watch the prairie change with the seasons. Luke had built bookshelves into every available wall space, knowing Emily's growing collection would need room, and had even constructed a small desk where she could prepare lessons. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harrison," he said, carrying her over the threshold. That first week of marriage passed in a blur of discovery and joy. They established routines, Luke leaving early for the livery, while Emily prepared for school meeting for lunch, when possible evenings spent reading together, or walking the prairie nights of passion that left them both amazed at their good fortune. The first day Emily returned to teaching as a married woman, the children were beside themselves with excitement. "Should we call you Mrs. Harrison now?" Martha asked. "I think Miss Carter for school is fine," Emily said. Less confusing. But she was Mrs. Harrison now, in all the ways that mattered. She wore Luke's ring, carried his name, shared his bed, and his dreams. The independence she'd fought so hard for hadn't disappeared in marriage. Instead, it had been enhanced by partnership with someone who valued her work as much as his own. 3 months into their marriage, Emily realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was certain. She told Luke on a Sunday afternoon as they sat on their porch, watching storm clouds build over the mountains. "Are you sure?" he asked, his face cycling through emotions: joy, fear, wonder, concern. "As sure as I can be without Doc Murphy's confirmation. But yes, I think so. The baby would come in the spring after the school term ends." Luke pulled her onto his lap, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby. Our baby. Emily, His voice broke, and she felt tears on his cheek as he buried his face in her neck. "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified too, though. What if something happens? What if I'm not a good father? What if... Emily kissed him to stop the spiral of worry. "We'll face whatever comes together. That's what we promised. Remember, together." They decided to wait to tell anyone until Emily began to show, but Sarah figured it out within a week, when Emily couldn't stand the smell of coffee during a visit to town. "Oh my lord, you're pregnant!" Sarah exclaimed, then promptly burst into tears. "I'm going to be an aunt, a real aunt, when... How far along have you seen Doc Murphy?" The news spread through both communities like wildfire, and Emily found herself the recipient of more advice than she could possibly process. Every woman in Elk Creek had wisdom to share about pregnancy and childbirth, while the men slapped Luke on the back and made jokes about sleepless nights ahead. Teaching while pregnant proved challenging as winter set in. Morning sickness made the first hours difficult, and as she grew larger, simply standing all day became exhausting. But the children were wonderfully protective, the older ones helping more with the younger, everyone trying to make their teacher's life easier. "You should stop teaching," Luke said one evening after Emily had nearly fainted during arithmetic lessons. "Just until the baby comes." "The term ends in 2 months," Emily protested. "I can manage that long." But the winter had other plans. A blizzard in February trapped Emily at the schoolhouse overnight, unable to get home, despite Luke's desperate attempts to reach her. She spent the night huddled by the stove, feeling the baby move inside her, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. When Luke finally reached her the next morning, wild-eyed with worry, he put his foot down. "No more. Sarah can finish the term. You're coming home and staying there until this baby is safely born." Emily wanted to protest, but seeing the fear in his eyes, feeling her own exhaustion, she agreed. Sarah took over the classroom, doing an admirable job, while Emily advised from home, and the children visited regularly, bringing their work for her to review. The baby came early on a March night when the snow was melting and the first hints of spring touched the air. Luke had fetched Doc Murphy at the first sign of labor, and Sarah had arrived with Mary Olmsted, the 2 women taking charge, while Luke paced the porch despite the cold. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Emily wondered if she was strong enough. But then she thought of that night on the station steps, of all the challenges she'd overcome, and she found reserves she didn't know she had. When their daughter was finally born healthy and loud and perfect, Luke wept openly as he held her for the first time. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." "What should we name her?" Emily asked, exhausted but euphoric. "Hope," Luke said without hesitation. "Hope Sarah Harrison. Because that's what you brought to my life, what you brought to Elk Creek. Hope." Sarah burst into fresh tears at hearing the baby would carry her name, and even Doc Murphy seemed moved by the moment. Recovery was slow, and Emily chafed at being confined to bed while spring bloomed outside. But the community rallied around them, bringing food, helping with chores, and passing baby Hope around like she belonged to all of them. "She's Elk Creek's first baby born to a teacher," Robert McKenzie said proudly. "That makes her special." "All babies are special," Emily corrected, but she smiled at the sentiment. When she was finally strong enough, Emily brought Hope to the schoolhouse for the children to meet. They were enchanted, especially the girls who begged to hold her. "Will you come back to teach?" Martha asked anxiously. "Sarah's good, but she's not you." "I'll be back in the fall," Emily promised. "Hope will come with me. She can sleep in the corner while I teach, and you can all help watch her." "A baby in school?" little Tommy Brennan asked doubtfully. "Why not? She'll learn by listening, and you'll learn by helping. It's perfect." And it was in its own chaotic way. When school resumed in September, Emily taught with Hope in a cradle. Luke had built the baby sleeping through lessons or gurgling happily at the children who took turns rocking her during recess. It shouldn't have worked, but like everything else in Emily's frontier life, it did, because the community made it work. One evening that October, as Emily sat grading papers while Luke played with Hope on the cabin floor, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she'd been crying on cold station steps, certain her life was over. Now she was a wife, mother, and teacher, living a life she couldn't have imagined but wouldn't trade for anything. "What are you thinking about?" Luke asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "About Charlotte, actually. Wondering what became of her." Tom Brennan heard she married some banker in Denver. Very wealthy, very proper, very dull by all accounts. "I hope she finds happiness," Emily said, meaning it. Really. Really. Everyone deserves the chance to find where they belong. It took me coming all the way to Wyoming to find mine, but I found it. She looked at Luke, at Hope, at the stack of children's essays about what they wanted to be when they grew up: doctor, teacher, railway engineer, even president. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Luke stood pulling Emily to her feet and into his arms, while Hope babbled happily on her blanket. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "There's no music." "Don't need any." They swayed together in their simple cabin, no orchestra, no grand ballroom, just two people who'd found each other against all odds. Through the window, Emily could see the lights of Elk Creek. In the distance, the community that had embraced her, fought for her, became her family. "I love you," Luke murmured against her hair. "My brave, brilliant, peculiar strength wife." Emily laughed at the reference to Harold's letter. "I love you too. My patient, kind rescue the crying woman on station steps. Husband." "I'd do it again," Luke said seriously. 1,000 times over, I'd stop and offer you help, even knowing all the challenges we'd face." "And I'd take it," Emily replied, "even knowing the hard winters and the isolation and Charlotte's persecution. I'd take your hand and follow you to Sarah's boarding house and start this whole adventure again." Hope made a sound that might have been agreement, and they both laughed, breaking apart to tend to their daughter. As Emily lifted Hope into her arms, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror Sarah had given them as a wedding gift. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the Philadelphia Emily who'd boarded a train with such specific dreams. This Emily had sunlines around her eyes, from prairie brightness, calluses on her hands from building a life with real labor, and a contentment in her expression that no amount of Eastern sophistication could have provided. "The children want to do another play for Christmas," Emily told Luke as they prepared for bed. "About the first Christmas in Bethlehem, but Martha wants to add a subplot about wise men getting lost on the prairie and finding their way by following the Northern Star." "Sounds about right," Luke said, smiling. "We all need guides when we're lost in the wilderness." "You were mine?" Emily said softly. "That night at the station. You were my guide to this life I never knew I wanted. And you were mine back to believing life could be good again, Luke replied. They lay together in their bed, Hope in her cradle nearby, the vast prairie night surrounding their little cabin with its infinite silence and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, teaching while caring for a baby, expanding the livery business, navigating the complex dynamics of frontier life. But tonight, Emily felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had begun with tears on cold steps and led to this warm bed, this loving partner, this life built on choice rather than expectation. The school bell would ring again in the morning, calling children to learn and grow and dream. Emily would stand at the front of the classroom with Hope on her hip, teaching reading and arithmetic, but also teaching courage and possibility. She would show them through her own example that life could surprise you, that failure could become opportunity, that sometimes getting lost was the only way to find yourself. Luke shifted beside her, his arm coming around her waist, pulling her close in his sleep. Hope sighed in her cradle, dreaming baby dreams. Outside, an owl called across the prairie, and wind rustled through the grass with a sound like whispered promises. Emily closed her eyes, thinking one last time of that cold October night when she'd thought everything was ending. Luke had been right in those first words to her. She had already been home. She just hadn't known it yet. Home wasn't a place, but a choice, not a destination, but a determination to bloom wherever you were planted, to build something beautiful from whatever materials life provided. The morning would come soon enough with its duties and demands. But for now, Emily Harrison, teacher, wife, mother, frontier woman, simply held on to the warmth of her present and felt complete. She had traveled 3,000 miles to find herself, only to discover she'd been there all along, waiting to emerge when the right circumstances and the right person finally set her free. In Elk Creek, a dog barked. In Cottonwood, Sarah probably lay awake planning some new scheme to improve the boarding house. Somewhere on the vast prairie, other women like Emily were making their own brave choices, defying expectations, building lives of meaning rather than mere propriety. But here in this cabin, in this bed, in this life, she'd never planned but couldn't imagine living without Emily, simply existed in the perfect. Now, no longer the woman crying on station steps, no longer searching for where she belonged. She was home in the deepest sense, not because of where she was, but because of who she'd become and who she'd become it with. The owl called again, and Luke pulled her closer, and hope stirred but didn't wake. Tomorrow would bring its own adventures, its own challenges and triumphs. But tonight, Emily Harrison was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by love she'd earned through courage, determination, and the willingness to say yes when everything seemed to be saying no. The station steps were far away now in distance and in spirit, but Emily would never forget them. Never forget the cold that had driven her to warmth, the despair that had led to joy, the ending that had been a beginning. Those steps had been her catalyst, the breaking point that became a turning point. And in the morning, when the school bell rang across the valley calling children to come and learn, it would also be calling Emily to continue becoming teacher guide example of what was possible when you stopped accepting what was expected and started creating what was essential. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, she simply held on to Luke, to this moment, to the life she'd built from the ruins of the one she'd lost, and knew that sometimes the best journey was the one you never planned to take, and the best home was the one you built yourself. One choice, one day, one act of courage at a time.